Okay, sir. Okay, hi. So good evening to all of you. We have 70 participating today, 79 now. Okay. So last week, of course, we could not have the lecture because there was a rumor going that there may be a curfew imposed on that day. So that is why we did not have the lecture that day. So anyway, so today we'll have lecture 4. Lecture 4 where we are discussing about the long-term assets or non-current assets. Right. So I don't know if the presentation was shared. If it is not shared, of course, I will do it now. Before that, since we had discussed about off-balance sheet financing that day, or we have discussed about off-balance sheet financing, also we have discussed about factoring with recourse, without recourse. Let us also discuss about sales and leaseback, sale and leaseback transactions. Now, sale and leaseback also we consider as an off-balance sheet financing transaction. Now, why we consider sale and leaseback as an off-balance sheet financing transaction? Because it is a method by which a company or an individual can raise money while keeping the asset also. Now, in a sale and leaseback transaction, you will know basically the company first sell the asset. The company or the individual first sell the asset. So there's a disposal, there may be disposal gain or loss. Thereafter, the company again leases back the asset. So first it sells, thereafter it leases back. That is why it is called sale and leaseback. Now, sometimes what can happen is people can manipulate this. I hope you all can hear me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Right, okay. So sometimes what can happen is people can manipulate this. How they can manipulate? I mean, they can sell, let's say, for example, a particular asset for a value to a known party, and then, of course, they might enter into a leasing transaction for a lower value. Now, this is something that is avoided. This is something that is corrected by the new leasing standard. You know, for leasing, there's a new standard which is SFRS 16, and this standard is in effect, or this standard is effective from January 2019. So before that, we had a different standard. It was called as IAS 17, but from 1st January 2019 for leasing, we have a different standard, which is called as either IFRS 16 or SLFRS 16. So IFRS 16 or SLFRS 16 is different to the previous standard. Now here the main difference is for the lessee. In other words, as per SLFRS 16 or as per IFRS 16, lessee recognizes all assets. Lessee recognizes apart from low value assets and apart from short term assets, lessee recognizes all assets as right of use assets and treats these assets as assets in the balance sheet. In other words, in the lessee's statement of financial position, these assets are recorded as assets. Apart from short-term assets as well as for low-value assets. Therefore, the lease accounting for the lessee, when it comes to the accounting by lessee, is very different as per SLFRS 16 compared to the previous standard. But the lease accounting for a lessor is still the same. I mean, there is no change for the lease accounting, or there is no change in the lease accounting for the lessor. The only change is in the lease accounting for a lessee. So let me share my screen. I will explain this in a Word document, okay? Basically, lease accounting is changed based on SLFRS 16, which is also called as IFRS 16. The changes are mainly for a lessee than for a lessor. lessee recognizes all assets based on right of use. Right of use unless the asset is for a short-term duration or the asset is a low value asset. So basically, lessee recognizes all assets based on right of use unless the asset is for a short-term duration which is less than 12 months or the asset is a low value asset. Now, normally, low value is defined as a value less than $5,000. Low value has been defined as value less than $5,000. So mostly items such as computers, furniture, etc. may not be recognized as assets by a lessee. Right. So that's about the normal accounting for a lessee and a lessor. Now let's come to sale and lease back. Sale and lease back. Now this is where we first sell and then lease back the same asset. So I can say here, this concerns about selling and leasing back the same asset. Selling and leasing back the same asset. Now the problem here is what? Problem here is, as I explained earlier, people can manipulate this. People can manipulate this. So I can say problem in sale and lease back is that people can manipulate. People can manipulate. So let's say, for example, I'll take an Excel sheet. So let's say there's an asset with a carried forward value. Let's say 1 million. And this asset was disposed, let's say, for 1.8 million disposal value. So normally, what will happen? You recognize the disposal gain. You recognize the disposal gain, which is the difference between the disposal value and the carrying value, 800,000 rupees. Now, say for example, after disposing this asset for 1.8 million, this company or the individual leases back the same asset. I'll say here, the same asset is leased back. The same asset is leased back from the buyer by the seller for a lower value. Now, say for example, you know, when you enter into a new leasing transaction, of course you agree for certain minimum lease payments. Now, when it comes to IFRS 16 or SLFRS 16, how you recognize a lease asset and a lease liability? You calculate basically present value of minimum lease payments. Present value of minimum lease payments. Now, present value of minimum lease payment is equal to your liability, and also it is the value you have to recognize as the value of the asset. Now, here is the difference. Present value, let's say, present value of minimum lease payments. Present value of minimum lease payments, let's say 1.4 million. Now see the problem. An asset with a carrying value of 1 million, you sold for 1.8 million. So you recognize a disposal gain of 800,000. You might have sold to a known party. So you have recognized a disposal gain of 800,000 and you collected 1.8 million. Now you're leasing back the same asset. You're leasing back the same asset from the same party. And now the present value of the minimum lease payments is 1.4 million. In other words, basically the value of the asset is 1.4 million. The value of the asset is 1.4 million. Therefore, what we do? We don't recognize 1.4 million as the value of the new asset or as the value of the lease asset. We recognize that amount as the value of the liability. This is the lease liability. Lease liability. And then as the value of the new asset. Value of the new asset. We do a small calculation to arrive at the proportionate value of the new asset. Now this is what we do. Earlier, an asset with a carrying value of 1 million, we sold for 1.8 million. And now we are saying for the same asset, the liability is 1.4 million. So therefore, what we are doing is, we are taking the fraction of 1.4 million over 1.8 million, and we multiply by the previous carrying value in order to determine the new value of the asset. I repeat. Understand the question. An asset with a carrying value of 1 million, you sold for 1.8 million, maybe to known party. So you realize a disposal gain of 800,000. And then from the same party to who you sold the asset, or in other words, from the buyer, you are leasing back the asset. So when you are leasing back the asset from the buyer, you recognize the liability based on the present value of minimum lease payment. So 1.4 million is that value, present value of minimum lease payment. So that is the value of lease liability. But when you are recognizing the value of new asset, I told you, the lessee has to recognize all assets based on right of use. So when you are recognizing the value of the new asset, then of course you can take the value as 1.4 million. That value will be proportionate. That value will be proportionate to the new liability compared with what you already received when you sold the asset, multiplied by the previous carrying value. So basically what we are saying is this. Understand basically what we are doing. Okay? Asset value, then we have a disposal value, and we have a liability, new lease liability. New lease liability. So basically what we are saying is, okay, we had an asset value of 1 million earlier. So the asset value of 1 million we sold for 1.8 million. And now the new lease liability is 1.4 million. So if the new lease liability is 1.4 million, the corresponding value of the asset would be this amount divided by this, multiplied by this. The corresponding value of the new asset is 777,777.8. So basically, how much would be the disposal gain? Now previously, the disposal gain was the difference between these two. But now here, when you are leasing back, you are making a loss. You recognize a higher liability than an asset value. So here, there's a net loss. $622,222. So basically, net disposal gain from the transaction. Net disposal gain from the transaction is 177,777.8. Now let's see how the double entries are passed. Let's see how the double entries are passed. So you have a new asset. you have a new asset. So asset value 777,000. And when you sold, you realize cash disposal value 1.8 million. Then the previous asset value, I will say this is the new asset value. New asset value you are debiting. So previous asset value, you credit 1 million. New liability, new lease liability. New lease liability, again, it's a new liability, fresh liability, you credit 1.4 million. And disposal gain, net disposal gain. Net disposal gain, you credit this amount. So basically, you can see the complete double entry now. Both sides are tallied. Is this clear? Is this clear? Is this clear? So this is how you account when there's a sale and lease back. So therefore you are now, I mean, as per the new standard, now you are not allowing any distortions to happen, or you are not allowing any manipulations to take place. So how you are avoiding such manipulations? Because when you after selling, if you lease back the same asset, of course you have to recognize the new asset at a lesser value than the liability. So in this way, you are avoiding the distortions, you are avoiding the manipulations, you are reducing the disposal gain. Are we clear? If you have any questions, please ask. Okay, very important, sale and lease back might be tested, might not be tested, but whether it is tested or not for this exam, you have to understand, as future accountants, you need to understand what happens in a sale and lease back transaction. Basically, what people can do is people can play around. People can play around. What they can do is, of course, they can sell for a higher value and they can lease for a lower value. They can enter into a new lease for a lower value, or they can record a liability for a lower value. So if you are recording a liability for a lower value, as in this case, then of course you have to recognize a corresponding asset at an even lower value. So your earlier disposal gain will reduce. Original disposal gain is 800,000, but the revised disposal gain is 177,777, which means basically you can't play around. Is this clear? Is this clear? Come on, is this clear? Right, fine, okay. So now we'll move into today's presentation about long-lived assets. That's about sale and leaseback. Okay, sale and leaseback, remember, it is something, it is an area people can play around. People as well as companies can play around. So that is the very purpose why it was avoided by the standard. So the standard says, of course, if you are leasing back the same asset at a low value, then you recognize an asset for an even lower value. So your earlier disposal gain will now come down. So that's how the standard avoids the distortions. Right. Now we'll move into today's presentation about long-lived assets or non-current assets. So what do you mean by non-current assets or long-lived assets? Long-lived assets or non-current assets. These are resources which are used to generate revenues. Or reduce cost in the long run. So as we know, we have tangible fixed assets here, such as property, plant and equipment, intangible assets such as patents, trademarks, copyright and goodwill. And also there can be deferred charges. Deferred charges such as research and development expenditure and natural resources. Right, capitalization. We know long-lived assets we need to capitalize. So capitalization is the process of deferring a cost which is incurred in the current period and whose benefits are expected to extend to one or more future periods. So what do we mean? We know long-lived assets or non-current assets we need to capitalize. What is the purpose of capitalizing? Because we know the benefits of non-current assets we will realize not in the short term but in the long term. Since we are going to realize the benefits in the long term, we need to capitalize the cost. That is what we are doing. So process of deferring the cost which is incurred in the current period and whose benefits are expected to extend to one or more future periods. So since you are going to get the benefits in the future, you need to capitalize. Otherwise, what you will do? If you are going to get a benefit only for 1 year, if you are going to get a benefit only in the current year, then what you will do? If you are going to get a benefit only in the current year, then what you will do? Come on, what you will do? If you are going to get a benefit only in the current year, then what you will do? Expense it. Absolutely. You will expense it because then those will be current assets. Okay, for a cost to be capitalized, it must meet each of the following criteria. It must arise from a past transaction. These are basic things. Okay? It must arise from a past transaction or an event. It must yield identifiable and reasonably profitable and reasonably probable future benefits. It must allow owner restrictive control. Within brackets says restrictive control over future benefits. So basically, it must arise from a past transaction. From the past, from the resource, you must get the future economic benefits, and the owner should be able to control or should be able to guide the direction, or he should be able to control the resource. So it must arise from a past transaction or an event. You must be able to get the future economic benefits, and you should have the full control over the future benefits. Right, now let's come to allocation. So what do you mean by allocation? This is the process of periodically expensing the deferred cost. So one or more future expected benefit periods determine the benefit period, salvage value, and allocation method. So basically, allocation means you are allocating the cost of an asset over future periods. So this is what we call as depreciation. In the case of intangible assets, this is in amortization. For natural resources, this is called as depletion. So remember, allocation is the periodically expensing. Allocation means periodically expensing the cost of an asset over future periods. So depending on the type of the asset, we have different names for this. For tangible assets, we call it as depreciation. For intangible assets, we call as amortization. For natural resources, we call as depletion. Okay. So as you know, when we calculate depreciation, we need to know several things. We need to know the cost. We need to know the salvage value. We need to know the useful life. So if we know these three, cost, salvage value, as well as the useful life, then of course we can calculate the periodic expense, which can either be depreciation, amortization, or in the case of natural resources, we call it as depletion, but it is again an amortization. It is again an allocation of the cost. Impairment. Now what is impairment? What is impairment? Depreciation is the periodic allocation of the cost. What do you mean by impairment? Impairment is a permanent reduction in the value. You can read the definition here. Impairment is the process of writing down asset value when it is expected cash flows are less than the carrying value. Very important. So if you expect that from a particular asset that you are going to get a lower value in the future, or the value of a particular asset is going to be less than what you have recorded in the balance sheet, then of course you have to write down the value of that asset in the balance sheet. Now this process is what we call as impairment. So I repeat, impairment is a permanent reduction in asset value. So if there's a permanent reduction in the asset value, what we need to do is we need to write down the value of the asset which we show in the balance sheet. So when we write down the value of the asset that we show in the balance sheet, we call it as impairment. Okay. So process of writing down asset value when it is expected cash flows are less than the carrying value. Right. So basically, property, plant, and equipment, if they're tangible, then of course actively used operation expected to benefit future periods. Then examples are property, plant, and equipment. So PPE, property, plant, and equipment cost in role. I want to come to intangibles. Okay, tangible assets, you know, property, plant, and equipment cost in role. Basically, as the cost of property, plant, and equipment, you need to consider purchase price as well as other expenses. So all expenditure needed to prepare the asset for its intended use. All those expenses, connected expenses, you need to consider. So not only the purchase price, but all connected expenses relating to the property, plant, and equipment, you need to include as the cost of the asset. And also acquisition cost exclude, this is also very important. Acquisition cost excludes financing charges and cash discounts. Very important. Financing charges. And also if you have received any cash discounts, you should not consider those. You should not consider those. Acquisition cost excludes financing charges and cash discounts. Financing charges, now say for example, one might say, okay, I'm investing on a particular asset. So if I invest on a particular asset for 5 years, there will be this much of a financing charge. You might say, okay, I'm investing 1 million rupees. Or you might say, I'm investing 10 million rupees. I'm investing 10 million rupees and my finance cost is normally 10%. So my finance charge in relation to this asset for 1 year, one might say 1 million rupees, but it is not correct. So when we calculate the acquisition cost, we need to exclude financing charges as well as cash discounts. So valuation analysis. Valuation emphasizes objectivity of historical cost, the conservatism principle, and accounting for the money invested. Accounting for the money invested, very important. Valuation emphasizes objectivity of historical cost. Now, what do you think? Do you think historical cost is very objective? Can it be proved? Can it be proved? Historical cost? Can you prove historical cost? Can or can't? Can or can't? Can you prove the historical cost? Can you prove the historical cost? Okay, how? How can you prove the historical cost? To prove the historical cost, what you need to have? Prove the historical cost, what you need to have? You need to basically have what? Absolutely, you need to have the invoice value. You need to have the previous or historical invoice. If you have the historical invoice, you can prove the value. So now that is what it says. Valuation emphasizes objectivity of historical cost, conservatism principle, and accounting for the money invested. So limitations of historical cost. We know historical cost has certain limitations. So what are they? Balance sheets do not purport to reflect market value. So if you are recording, if you are showing something at the historical cost, you are not showing the market value of the asset. And there can be a big difference between the historical cost and the market value. So if there's a big difference between the historical cost and the market value, then of course, if you use the historical cost, you are not recording the proper value or you are not taking the proper value. Not especially relevant in assessing replacement value. So if you want to replace a particular asset, no point of looking at the historical value. So if you want to replace a particular asset, then of course you need to consider replacement value or the market value. not comparable across companies. Now, this is also very important because assets, the same type of assets may have been purchased by different companies at different time periods. So they may have recorded a historical cost for different time periods. So in one company, the asset may have been purchased long time ago. So in that company's historical cost may be very low. Another company may have purchased just now. It may be relatively new. So it is not possible to compare the historical cost of the asset purchased by the latest company with the historical cost of the asset purchased by the very old company. So these differences you need to understand, not comparable across companies and not particularly useful in measuring opportunity cost. Again, the same thing. Historical cost doesn't give any conclusion, or historical cost doesn't give any evidence about the opportunity cost. Historical cost is a historical cost. It is the amount that you have paid when you actually purchase the asset. So it is the amount that you have actually incurred. It has no relevance for the present and also for the future. If you want to replace it, historical cost is not relevant. If you want to determine the future value of the company based on net asset value, again the historical cost is not relevant. Now you all told me you all are studying valuation. You all are studying valuation in this semester. So if you are studying valuation, you will learn that there is a valuation technique called net asset value. So what do you mean by net asset value? We calculate the net asset value of all assets and liabilities. Net asset value of all assets and liabilities. So when we calculate the net asset value of all assets and liabilities, basically we need to consider market values and not the historical values. And also you can't use it to measure opportunity cost. So we have discussed it doesn't give you any information about how much you will lose. How much you will lose because those costs were incurred in the past. So if you have any questions, please ask. If you have any questions, please ask. Remember always there are different types of values: market value, replacement value, historical cost, and also opportunity cost. If you use historical cost for valuation of assets and liabilities, then of course you can use that valuation to determine the true value of the company. It will not reflect the true value of the company because market values will be different, replacement values will be different, and also those values will not reflect the opportunity cost. Any questions? Any questions which you need to ask? Come on. Is this clear? Is this clear? Okay, what is that? Right. So depreciation, we know it is the allocation. Depreciation is the name given for allocation of cost of tangible assets. So depreciation is the process of allocating the cost of a plant asset to expense in the accounting periods benefiting from its use. So basically, depreciation is the term that we are using for the allocation of the cost of a tangible asset. So we have the acquisition cost and we allocate that in order to expense that for different periods. That is what is called as depreciation. So factors in computing depreciation, what factors are required when you calculate depreciation? All these things are basic things. We know these things: cost, salvage value, useful life, and also depreciation method. Sorry. Okay, comparing depreciation methods, straight line method, all of us know how to calculate depreciation: cost minus salvage value divided by lifetime or depreciation rate. Based on the units of output, depreciation would be cost minus salvage value. You take cost minus salvage value as the numerator and then you divide by total expected output. Total expected output during the duration of the or during the lifetime of the asset. So then you calculate depreciation per unit that you multiply by number of units that you have produced in a particular period to calculate the total depreciation. So if you want to ask anything, please ask, okay? So analyzing depreciation and depletion. Assess reasonableness of depreciable base, useful life and allocation method, review in revisions. Now these are the things that you need to consider. Okay? As an analyst, these are the things that you need to consider when you are analyzing depreciation, or as an analyst, as an auditor. These are the things you need to consider. Reasonableness of depreciable base. Depreciable base means, remember, depreciable base means cost minus salvage value. Okay. Reasonableness of depreciable base, useful life and allocation method. Review and revisions of useful life. So if the useful lives were changed, review why and for what reason they have changed. Evaluate adequacy of depreciation. That is ratio of depreciation to total assets or to other size related factors. Analyze plant asset age measures. So basically, all these things are known things. Average total lifespan, that is gross plant and equipment assets over current year depreciation expense. All these are ratios that you can do on your own and calculate. So let's take some figures and discuss these things. So it says average total lifespan. Average total lifespan, gross plant and equipment asset, current year depreciation expense. So I will let me give you some figures here. Can you see the Excel screen? And get back here. Something has happened. All right, okay. Let's say gross plant and equipment asset. I will some figures. Let's say 10 million. This is gross plant and equipment. The average depreciation. Common things, average depreciation per year. 100,000. So if the gross PPE is 1 million, if the gross PPE is 1 million and average depreciation per year is 100,000, or you can even take current year depreciation. Current year depreciation. What's the average lifespan? How much is the average lifespan? Gross property, plant and equipment 1 million. Current year depreciation 100,000. So which means basically it's 100 million. 10 million. Sorry. So 1 million and 100,000. So gross property, plant and equipment 1 million, current depreciation 100,000, which means average lifespan is 10 years. So we'll take the other one, average age. Now say for example, we also have accumulated depreciation. Accumulated depreciation. Now say for example, accumulated depreciation, I'll take the same figures here or related figures to the same example. Let's say accumulated depreciation is 500,000. So if the accumulated depreciation is 500,000, current depreciation is 100,000, we can calculate the average age of the assets. Average age. So basically, average age is what? Accumulated depreciation divided by current year depreciation. All these are years. Average lifespan here 10 years. Here 5 years. Average remaining life. Now say for example, that is also not difficult. We know gross property, plant and equipment 10 million, accumulated depreciation 500,000. So net PPE is therefore 1 million minus 500,000. 500,000. So remaining life would be 500,000 divided by current year depreciation. In 5 years. Simple things. Then average total lifespan. Average total lifespan. That is basically remaining life 5 years, current age 5 years. So total lifespan 10 years. Which is same as this. Which is same as this. Are we clear? Are we clear? I mean, these are simple calculations. Are these things clear? I mean, from the figures in the financial statements, you can do these evaluations. You can do this cross-checking. You can do these cross-checks to see whether there is any change. Now, say for example, whether there is any change for the method of depreciation, whether there is any change for the useful life of the asset. All those things you can check as an analyst. Is that clear? Is that clear? Right. So give me 1 second. Right. So basically, now this is what is given in this slide. Let me share the slide again. So all these things, all these calculations, which you can see here, average total lifespan, average age, average remaining life, average total lifespan, all these things you can calculate. I mean, those are not difficult calculations. Right. Now let's move into intangible assets, which is very important. Intangible assets, they have certain characteristics. What are the characteristics? They are non-current assets without any physical substance. They often provide exclusive rights or privileges. Useful life is often difficult to determine and usually acquired for operational use. So I repeat, these are, as you know, these are not current assets. These are non-current assets. And they don't have a physical substance. They provide exclusive rights or privileges for the owner. And on intangible assets, it is very difficult to determine useful life. And these are normally acquired for operational use. In other words, for day-to-day use. So accounting for intangible assets. So first of all, what are these intangible assets? Things like patents, copyrights, leasehold improvements, goodwill, trademarks, as well as trade names. So all these are examples for intangible assets. So with regard to intangible assets, what you do first, you record at cost, and this cost includes purchase price, legal fees, and also filing fees. So all these are examples for cost. So basically intangible assets, remember you are recording at cost. Cost includes the purchase price, legal fees, and filing fees. So analyzing intangible assets and goodwill. Analyzing intangible assets and goodwill. So as a financial analyst, when you analyze intangible assets, basically you have to search for unrecorded intangibles and goodwill. In other words, there can be unrecorded intangibles. Organizations might not have recorded certain intangibles. They might not have recorded certain goodwill values. So search for those unrecorded intangibles as well as goodwill. Now, how you are going to check? How you are going to check whether a company is having a goodwill? Check for super earnings. Check for economic profits. If a company is having super profits or economic profits, then of course it indicates that they may be having a goodwill. Review amortization periods. If they have super profits, if they have intangible assets, then review how they are going to amortize the intangible assets. Review the amortization periods. And always remember, you need to recognize goodwill is not an indefinite asset. Goodwill has a limited useful life. So know that goodwill has a limited useful life, and also know that you need to amortize and finish goodwill within a period of time. Mostly within 5 years, we amortize goodwill. So as a financial analyst, I repeat, as a financial analyst, when you are analyzing intangibles as well as goodwills, first search for unrecorded intangibles as well as goodwill. Check from the documents, check from the papers, whether you can find any evidence for intangible assets, whether you can find any evidence for super profits. So if there are super profits, then of course it indicates there may be a goodwill. So if there's a goodwill, review the amortization periods. And also remember, goodwill is not an indefinite asset. It always has useful economic life or limited useful life. Now, is this clear? Is this clear? Is it clear? Right. So we'll continue. Right. Now, after intangible assets, we'll come to investment securities, which is very important. Now, as you know, now what are investment securities? What are investment securities? First, let's define that. What are investment securities? What are investment securities? You have debt investments and also you have equity investments. You have various types of debt investments. Now, as finance students, you must be knowing. You have various types of debt investments, investments that you can make in the debt market, and also investments that you can make in the equity market. So you have debt investments as well as equity investments. So debt investments are either kept for trading purposes or you keep them till they mature, held to maturity, or they're available for sale. In other words, you might not keep them till maturity. If there's an opportunity, you might sell. So I repeat, debt investments can be of three types. held for trading purposes only. Buying and selling, held for trading purposes only. Held till maturity, or you're holding till you find an opportunity to sell. In other words, those are available for sale. Now, when it comes to equity investments, as you know, an investor or a person can invest in equity investments in three ways. Sometimes he might invest in an insignificant percentage of shares. He might invest in an insignificant percentage of shares. Let's say, for example, he might invest for about 1%, 2%. So if he's investing an insignificant percentage of shares, that can be either for trading purpose, or that can be until they find an opportunity to sell. Until they find an opportunity to sell. So basically, equity investments below 20% doesn't give, equity investments below 20% doesn't give any controlling power or any type of influencing power for the holder, or any type of influencing power for the investor. He might invest in, let's say, 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%, whatever the percentage, but he doesn't obtain any controlling interest. He can't influence the affairs of the company. He's keeping these investments either for trading purposes or as available for sale. Whenever he gets an opportunity, he might sell, or he might buy these investments exclusively sell. If he is regularly trading in the stock market, if he's regularly trading in the stock market, if he's regularly buying and selling, then that may be his job. He may be doing this as his job, as his daily job. So if he's doing this as a part of his daily routine, then he is keeping these investments for trading. Sometimes a person might keep these investments until the right time to sell, so available for sale. On the other hand, if a person or if a company has invested in another company, between 20 to 50%, we call it as an associate company, because they can influence significantly. If a company or a person has invested in another company more than 50%, we say he is investing to obtain the controlling power, or he is having controlling interest. So these are different types of debt investments and equity investments. So I repeat, debt investments can be traded, can be held till maturity, or keep it until they mature, or available for sale. Equity investments might be investments which do not give any type of influence in power. Sometimes they might give you significant influence if you're holding between 20% to 50%. If you're holding more than 50%, they might give you controlling interest. Now, is this clear? Is this clear? Right. Now, let's first look at debt investments. Now, as I told you, there are three types of debt investments: held to maturity, trading, and available for sale. So what do you mean by held to maturity? These are securities acquired with both the intent and ability to hold till maturity. So basically, you are having the intention, and also you are able to keep till maturity. So if you are keeping investments till maturity, in the balance sheet, you are showing the investments at amortized cost. I repeat, if you are hold in a particular debt investments, if you have hold in a particular debt investment till maturity, in the balance sheet you are showing it at the amortized cost. So first we'll look at the balance sheet statement. Then trading. These are securities acquired mainly for short-term trading gains, usually less than 3 months. So if you are keeping a debt security for trading purposes, you are showing it in the balance sheet at the fair value. Available for sale. Securities neither held for trading nor held to maturity. So basically, if you are in between, you are keeping till you find the right time to sell. So if you are waiting like that, then of course in the balance sheet you are showing the investment. You are showing the debt investment at the fair value. At the fair value again. Now let's come to the treatment in the income statement. Okay. Now in the income statement, you know there are two components: income statement and the other comprehensive income. Right. Now with regard to debt securities held to maturity. Debt securities held to maturity. We know in the balance sheet we are showing debt securities held to maturity at amortized cost. So we are not recognizing any unrealized gains or losses. Any unrealized gains or losses we do not recognize on these investments in either net income or in the comprehensive income statement. I repeat, listen to me very carefully. Debt investments held to maturity in the balance sheet, we record at the amortized cost. Since we are recording at the amortized cost, neither in the income statement nor in the comprehensive comprehensive income statement, we are not showing any unrealized gains or losses. Now, when it comes to other gains or losses, such as interest income, if there is an interest income, then that interest income is recognized in the net income or in the income statement. So only realize, okay? Recognize, realize gains or losses and also interest income in the net income. For trading investments, for trading debt securities, unrealized gains and losses we recognize in the net income. Other realized gains or losses as well as interest income, that too we recognize in the net income. And for available for sale investments, unrealized gains or losses, we do not recognize in the net income, but we recognize in the other comprehensive income. Realized gains and losses as well as interest income, we are recognizing in net income. So let me show you that in Excel so that you will understand it much better. Simple summary. Type of the investment. Oh, it is one of the three. Held to maturity. Held to maturity. Trading. Another one is available for sale, AFS. In the balance sheet or in the statement of financial position, in the income statement, basically, realize gains or losses and unrealized gains or losses. So basically, if it is held to maturity, these are the investments we keep till they mature. In the balance sheet, we show at the amortized cost. Trading investments, trading debt securities, we show at the fair value. Available for sale also we show at the fair value. Now realized gains and losses. Now here there are two things: realized gains and losses and interest income. Realized gains and losses and interest income. So if there are realized gains and losses as well as interest income, we basically recognize in the income statement. If there are unrealized gains or losses, we do not recognize. If the investment is held till maturity, if the investment is held till maturity, unrealized gains or losses we don't recognize. If the investment is a trading investment, then realized gains and losses as well as interest income we recognize in the income statement. And unrealized gains or losses also we recognize in the income statement. Remember, okay, if the investment is a trading investment, all types of gains as well as losses, whether it is a realized gain or loss, whether it is an unrealized gain or loss, we recognize in the income statement. If it is available for sale, then realized gains or losses as well as interest income in the income statement. This is in the income statement. This is in the other comprehensive income. Other comprehensive income. So this is as simple as that. So is this clear? Is this clear? Is this clear? So basically, interest income as well as realized gains or losses we recognize under income statement. So that is common. Interest income as well as realized gains or losses we recognize under the income statement. Unrealized gains or losses with regard to trading investments in the income statement, with regard to available for sale in the other comprehensive income, with regard to held till maturity or held to maturity, we do not recognize. So are we clear? This is the summary. Right. So I'll go back to the presentation. Right. Now this is also very important. Accounting for transfers between security classes. Right. Now see, if there's a transfer, if there's a transfer for debt investment from held to maturity to available for sale, understand, okay? From held to maturity to available for sale, how do you record that in the balance sheet and also in the income statement? Now we know normally if an investment is held to maturity in the balance sheet, we show at amortized cost. If it is available for sale in the balance sheet, we show at the fair value. So if you are transferring from held to maturity to available for sale, what is the effect to balance sheet? What is the effect on the asset value in the balance sheet? Basically, if you are transferring an asset which is currently at held to maturity to available for sale, you are reporting the asset at the amortized cost. Sorry, you are reporting the asset at the fair value. You are reporting the asset at the fair value since you are moving from held to maturity to available for sale. So therefore, you are recording the asset at the fair value instead of the amortized cost. In the income statement, unrealized gain or loss. See here, unrealized gain or loss on the date of transfer included in the comprehensive income. Why? Normally, we know we don't recognize unrealized gains or losses on held to maturity investments. But if we are transferring held to maturity as available for sale, then if there are unrealized gains or losses, those unrealized gains or losses now we are recognizing in the other comprehensive income, not in the income statement. Now see this, we are transferring trading investments as available for sale. So we know in the balance sheet, whether it is trading or available for sale, it is shown at the fair value. So there is no change, no effect. But we know unrealized gains or losses, if it is trading, we recognize in the net income. If it is available for sale, we recognize in the other comprehensive income. So unrealized gain or loss on the date of transfer included in the net income. Included in the net income. So if there are any unrealized gains or losses on the date of transfer, when you are transferring from trading to available for sale, it is included in the net income. The same thing, when the opposite happens also same thing. When you are transferring available for sale to trading, balance sheet no effect. In the income statement, unrealized gains or losses on the date of transfer included in net income. Then what about this? Available for sale to held to maturity. This is the opposite of the first one. Available for sale to held to maturity. In the balance sheet, no effect at transfer. No effect at transfer. However, asset reported at amortized cost instead of the fair value at the future date. So basically, on the date of the transfer, you are transferring the same value. You are transferring the same available value, which is the fair value. But in the future periods, you are recording the asset at the amortized cost instead of the fair value. Instead of the fair value. Then unrealized gains or losses. Unrealized gains or losses when you are transferring from available for sale to held to maturity, you are recognizing in the other comprehensive income. Unrealized gain or loss on the date of transfer included in the other comprehensive income. Right. So let me show you that also. Transfer from to transfer to. Then the impact in the balance sheet. Impact in the P&L. We are transferring from first held to maturity to available for sale. Held to maturity to available for sale. Available for sale. So in the balance sheet, basically, you are recording at the fair value. Since you are moving to available for sale. Then unrealized P&L basically for unrealized gains or losses. I will say that. Unrealized gains or losses in the P&L you recognize under other comprehensive income. Other comprehensive income. Then in both ways, trade-in available for sale and available for sale to trade-in. So there is no change here. In the balance sheet, both under fair value. Here, unrealized gains or losses in both cases in the income statement. Then finally, other one, AFS to held to maturity. This is in future at amortized cost. In future, amortized cost. Here under other comprehensive income. So it is not difficult actually. I mean, it is very logical. From held to maturity, if you are moving to available for sale, then in the balance sheet, you record the fair value. Then any unrealized gains or losses you recognize under other comprehensive income. Then if you are moving from trade-in to available for sale, then you are then in the balance sheet, of course, no change because in the balance sheet both are recorded at the fair value. Unrealized gains or losses you recognize in the net income on the date of transfer. On the date of transfer, right? On the date of transfer, if there is an unrealized gain or loss, you recognize in the net income or income statement. I will say on the date of transfer. Income statement on the date of transfer. Here also same. So other way also available for sale to trading. Any unrealized gains or losses on the date of transfer you recognize in the income statement. Then available for sale to held to maturity. Any unrealized gains or losses on the date of transfer. This is again on the date of transfer. On the date of transfer. In the other comprehensive income. Is this clear? Is this clear? Is this clear? Any questions you can ask? Come on, come on. Is it clear? Tell me, is that clear? Right. So I'll move into the presentation again. We can finish it soon. Okay, we can finish today's lecture soon because last part is about equity investments. Right. So I'll go back to the presentation about equity investments. Right. I hope you can see the presentation. Now I told you if it is less than 20% ownership, if it is less than, can you see the presentation? Right. If the ownership is less than 20%, there is no influence on it. There is no influence on it. Valuation basis is fair value. In other words, if you have invested, let's say for about 5%, 10% of shares in other company, you recorded the fair value. So balance sheet asset value, fair value. Any unrealized gains, if there is any unrealized gains in income statement, what do you mean by unrealized gains? What do you mean by unrealized gains? I mean, we talk about unrealized gains. What are unrealized gains? Unrealized gains are the gains. Now, say for example, the difference between how much you have invested and the balance sheet value. If you haven't sold yet, now that's an unrealized gain. As at the balance sheet date, the difference between the market value and the amount you invested is an unrealized gain. It will become a realized gain only when you sell it. So that's the difference between realized gains and unrealized gain. When you sell it, it will become a realized gain. But before you sell it, if you show as an asset in the balance sheet, the difference between the market value, the spot value, and the amount you invested is the unrealized gain. So again, if the ownership is less than 20%, if the ownership is less than 20%, okay, ownership is less than 20%, there are two categories. Ownership is less than 20%, available for sale. In other words, you are keeping it until you find the right buyer or right time to sell. So less than 20%, but it is available for sale. So valuation basis fair value in the balance sheet, asset is shown at the fair value. Like debt investments, unrealized gains in the other comprehensive income for available for sale, and realized gains in the income statement. In other words, dividends and other realized gains. If the percentage is less than 20%, but you are keeping for trading purposes, then of course in the balance sheet you are showing at the fair value. Unrealized gains also you are showing in the net income. Realized gains such as dividends you show in the net income anyway. If you have between 20 to 50%, these are associate investments. If you have between 20 to 50%, then in the balance sheet you record at the equity method. In the balance sheet you record based on the equity method or using the equity method. So in the equity method, what we do, we take the acquisition cost adjusted for proportionate share of the profit after acquisition minus any amortization. So if it is accounted as an equity investment, if it is accounted as an equity investment or as an associate, unrealized gains we do not recognize. If there are any realized gains, then of course the percentage applicable for the investor we recognize in the investor's equity account and also in the investor's profit and loss account. So recognize proportionate share of investees' net income less appropriate amortization in the income statement. So if it is more than 50% full controlling interest, you go for a consolidation, you prepare a consolidated balance sheet. Unrealized gains, you do not recognize, but if there are any realized gains, then of course you take them into consolidated income statement. Right. So let me summarize this also in Excel. Equity investments. So basically what they're saying is this. I hope you all can see the screen. So equity investments, no influence. There are two categories available for sale and trading. Then significant influence and controlling interest. So no influence, there are two types available for sale and trading. So in both cases, percentage is less than 20%. For purpose, those things are common things. If it is less than 20% available for sale, it's a long or intermediate term. In between, intermediate term investment, this is a short term investment. Valuation is fair value, balance sheet value, fair value. In the case of available for sale, unrealized gains or losses in the comprehensive income. In the case of trading, unrealized gains or losses in the income statement. Realized gains or losses and dividends in the income statement, here also in the income statement. Equity method, it is between 20 to 50% equity method. Equity method we'll discuss very soon. In the equity method, what we do is acquisition cost adjusted for proportionate share of investees' retained earnings and appropriate amortization. Unrealized gains or losses we do not recognize. So this is what we do for realized gains or losses. We take the proportionate percentage belonging to the investor, basically. Proportionate percentage belonging to the investor. So in the consolidated balance sheet, if we have a controlling interest, we go for a consolidated balance sheet. Unrealized gains or losses we do not recognize. Realized gains or losses we recognize in the consolidated income statement. Right. Let me take this investment securities. Let me go for these equity investments, especially with regard to equity method of accounting, because we need to discuss about that more than the other methods. Right, equity method of accounting. Now, equity method accounting reports the parent's investment in the subsidiary and the parent share of the subsidiary's results as line items in the parent financial statements, referred to as one line consolidation. Right. So we'll discuss this. Don't worry about this definition. Generally used for investments representing 20 to 50% of the voting stock of a company's equity securities. Main difference between consolidation and equity method accounting rests in the level of detail reported in the financial statements. So we'll take an example. So in the investment account, initially recorded at the acquisition cost, increased by percentage share of investee earnings. As I told you, you have to take the percentage proportion of the profits, decreased by dividends. Income, investor reports percentage share of investee company earnings as equity earnings in the income statement. Dividends are reported as a reduction of the investment account, not as income. Okay. Let's take this example. Don't look at the workings, we'll do the working. Look at the example only. Assume that Global Corporation acquires for cash a 25% interest in Synergy for $500,000. So the investment value is $500,000, okay? Representing 1/4 of Synergy stockholders' equity. So $500,000 represents 1/4 or 25% of the total number of shares. 1/4 of Synergy's stockholders' equity as of the acquisition date. So basically, acquisition entry, when you pay money, you know, investment account you debit, cash account you credit. And this is the balance sheet of Synergy, okay? This is the balance sheet of Synergy. At the date of acquisition, current assets 700,000, property, plant and equipment 5.6 billion, total assets 6.3 million, current liabilities 300,000, long-term debt 4 million, Stockholders' equity. I told you they have acquired, Global acquired 25% for 500,000, which means total equity in Synergy is 2 million. So total liabilities and equity 6.3 million. So both are tallying. Subsequent to the acquisition date, Synergy reports net income of 100,000. Synergy reports net income of 100,000 and pays dividends of 20,000. Global records its proportionate share of Synergy's earnings and the receipt of dividends as follows. Right, now we understand the question. Now let's see what we need to do. This is what we are doing. Acquisition price 500,000. Acquisition price 500,000. So acquisition price is the investment account opening balance. Opening balance of the investment account. Profit of the investee. That means in the other company. Profit of the investee. Profit of the investee, we are told 100,000. Oh, sorry. You all can't see. Sorry. So acquisition price 500,000. It is the opening balance of the investment account. Profit of the investee 100,000. And dividends of investee 20,000. So this is what happens basically. So investment account of the investor. Opening balance opening balance 500,000. So this we need to add percentage share of profits. Percentage share of profits. Percentage share of profit. Now we know other company has made a profit of 100,000. So this company has invested in 25%. So out of 100,000, you own 25%. So that is 25,000. But other company has paid dividends also. Other company has paid dividends of 20,000. So which means out of those dividends, 25% you already received. That you need to minus. Percentage of dividends received. From this 25%. So basically closing balance. This is under equity method. This is how we account for associate companies. 510,000. Is this clear? No, we don't deduct dividends from opening balance. We deduct dividends because dividends are paid out of what? Dividends are paid out of what? Come on, tell me. Dividends are paid out of what? Dividends are paid out of profits. So when you say, when you now see here, dividends are paid out of profits. So from profits, you have taken 25%. From profits, you have taken 25%. Therefore, dividends that you have received, you need to deduct. So investment account closing balance 520,000. This is what we call as equity method. Okay. Double entries are here, but what you have to understand is this. And you see, global corporations investment account closing balance is 520,000. Are we clear? Is this clear? Right. So basically the same thing, okay? We'll read this. The investment account represents the proportionate share of the stockholders' equity of the investee company. Substantial assets and liabilities may therefore not be recorded on the balance sheet unless the investee is consolidated. This can have important implications for the analysis of the investor company. So what you need to understand is investment account represents, okay, investment account represents the opening balance of the opening balance of the account together with any increases or decreases in the profits and dividends. I go back to the previous calculation. See, now here this 520,000 means 500,000 opening balance, share of profits minus share of dividends. But what if this other company, investee company, has increased the asset? What if this other company or the investee company has increased the asset base? If they have made new investments, then you don't own a percentage of the new investments. Do you understand? What you own is a percentage of the first investment. A percentage of the first investment plus profits and dividends thereafter. But if the investee company has purchased any assets thereafter, after your investment, if the investee company has purchased any new assets, you don't get any part of those new assets. Now that is what you have to carefully analyze. Wait. So basically I was telling, if you take this 520,000, how this 520,000 comes is you take 500,000, you add 25,000 and you deduct 5,000. So basically you are taking the opening investment from the opening net assets. You are taking the opening investment from the opening net assets and then adding profits and deducting dividends. What I am telling is this. Now say for example, this 500,000, it is a 25%. It's a 25% of 2 million. Now my question is, what if the investing company has increased the net assets? Now say for example, if the investing company's net assets is now 4 million. If the investing company's net assets is now 4 million, I mean, you will not have 25% of 4 million. You will only have 25% of 2 million together with post-acquisition share of profits minus post-acquisition share of dividends. Are we clear? Are we clear? Are we clear? Here we have the opening balance. So how we get this opening balance? We basically take 25% of the opening net assets.
We take 25% of opening net assets. You understand that? So starting with that, thereafter we add in a percentage share of profit and deducting the percentage share of dividends. What I am saying is this. Now, say for example, after the opening net assets of 2 million, the investing company may have gone for a sudden investment. They may have invested in new assets. So earlier net assets 2 million, now it may have increased to 4 million. So just because it has increased to 4 million, you are not going to have 25% of 4 million in your balance sheet. Do you understand that? So this is what you need to analyze. You are not going to have 25% of closing net assets as your investment account balance. Your investment account balance will always be opening balance plus percentage share of profits post acquisition minus percentage share of dividends. That is the closing balance, or that is how you calculate the closing balance of your investment account. You are not going to get percentage of the closing net assets of the investee. So that is what you have to be careful, and that is what you need to analyze as an analyst. So it is what is explained here. The investment account represents the proportionate share of the stockholders' equity of the investing company. Substantial assets and liabilities may therefore not be recorded on the balance sheet unless the invest is consolidated. So if the invest is consolidated, yes. But if the invest is not consolidated, then you are not going to have a percentage of those new asset values. This can have important implications for the analysis of the investor company. Investment earnings, that is proportionate share of the earnings of the investor company, should be distinguished from operating earnings in analysis of the earnings of the investor company. That means when you analyzing the operational performance, when you analyzing the operational performance of the investor company, you need to separate investor companies operating profit from the investment profit. In other words, this. Now, say for example, now this is the closing balance of the investment account of Global. Name of the company, I hope you remember. This is the closing balance of the investment account of Global. So what that second point says is, when you are analyzing the profitability of Global, you need to take Global's operating profit separately. You need to take Global's operating profit separately from the investment profit. Now, Global's investment profit is 20,000. Global's investment profit is 25,000. Its investment profit is this. It is coming from the investment in Synergy. So Global has invested in Synergy, and from Synergy, Global is getting 25,000. So what that point says is, when you're analyzing the profitability of Global, you need to separate Global's operating profit from the investment profit. Okay, take investment profit separately. Because for this 25,000 double entries, you are debiting the investment account, you are debiting the investment account of Global, and you are crediting Global's P&L. So this 25,000 goes as an investment profit to Global's P&L. So when you're analyzing the performance of Global, separate the investment profit coming from Synergy from the rest of the operational profits. That is what it is saying. Is that clear? Is that clear? Is that clear? That investments accounted for under the equity method are reported at adjusted cost, not at the market value. So we know, I mean, your investment account balance is not the market value. It doesn't show any market value. It is an adjusted cost. So what do you mean by adjusted cost? You take the opening value, you add the proportionate share of profits, you deduct the proportionate share of dividends. So it is at the adjusted cost, not at the market value. So investment accounted for under the equity method are reported at adjusted cost, not at market value. Substantial unrealized gains may therefore not be reflected in assets or stockholders' equity. Wait. So I was explaining the last point here. Investments accounted for under the equity method are reported at adjusted cost. Basically, we are not showing investments. Actually, in the case of the financial statements of the investor, now in this case, global corporation, in the global corporation's balance sheet, the investment in Synergy is not the market value. The investment in Synergy is at the adjusted cost. What do I mean by adjusted cost? Opening balance plus proportionate share of profits minus proportionate share of dividends. So that value is not the market value of Global's investment in Synergy. That is Global's investment in Synergy at the adjusted cost. So substantial unrealized gains may therefore not be reflected in the assets or stockholders' equity. So we have discussed this. If there are any unrealized gains, since the investment is not showing at the market value, if there are any unrealized gains or losses, those gains or losses we are not showing in the financial statements. Okay, we are not showing in the financial statements of the investor. Right. So consolidation, we know consolidation is the opposite of, consolidation is the extreme form of a business combination. So here we have two parties called as parent company and the subsidiary. So parent company is the party who owns or who controls the other company. Corporation who controls generally through ownership of equity securities, the activities of another separate legal entity known as subsidiary. So the two parties are parent and subsidiary. Parent company owns the subsidiary, so they can control the operations of the subsidiary. So parent-subsidiary relationship, when one company, so when one corporation, when one corporation owns all or a majority of the voting equity securities of another corporation. So basically, that is what we say as a normal parent-subsidiary relationship. So remember always, consolidation is different to investments in associates. Investment in associates we account based on the equity method. Full control, taking full control of another company or acquisitions, we account using consolidation method. So there are differences between the two methods of accounting. One method is called the equity method of accounting. The other method is called the consolidation accounting. Right. So anything to clarify? Anything to clarify? Anything to clarify on this? Come on. On anything that was discussed today, if you have anything to clarify, please tell me. Because that is the end of the presentation. Is that clear? If you have anything to clarify, please tell me. Is this clear? If it is clear, we can finish it off for today. Is that clear? Yeah, if you need to ask anything, please ask. I can share the presentation, slides, Excel workings, everything. And also, I will share the video clip also, because I don't think anyone has uploaded the video clips into Moodle. So I thought I could share. So, and in fact, I have shared. I have sent you an email immediately after each lecture. So what I will do now is all these past videos I will upload to Moodle also. So if anyone has missed receiving these emails, or if anyone has missed downloading these videos, then of course they can view the videos from the Moodle. So if it is clear, shall we wind up the class today? So basically this is it. This is the end of the presentation. If you have understood, then that is it. If you need any clarification, I can explain. Okay, then we'll call it a day, right? We'll finish it off for today. And thank you very much, right? Okay, good night. Bye.